Tom Allen spoke to the media ahead of fall camp this week and gave us some insight on some position battles we probably should be paying attention to over the next month.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody. This is Locked On Hoosiers, the only daily IU podcast. We're part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Appreciate you guys making us your first listen every single day. I'm your host, as always, Jacob Rude. Tom Allen spoke to the media during IU's Media Day earlier this week. Had a couple of very interesting comments. And if I toot my own horn, everydayers will have heard me talk about some burning questions about the IU football team earlier this week. Tom Allen pretty much touched on a number of those topics. Perhaps the most interesting were his comments about the defense. And that was the last thing we discussed in that Burning Questions podcast on Tuesday, is that what was the defense even going to look like? Tom Allen kind of said the same thing. He pointed out, or singled out, I should say, the secondary as the most open position heading into fall camp. Quote, I think the one that probably sticks out is a secondary corner position as well as the safeties. I just think the number of turnover, the guys that had played for several years here, those guys doing a great job for us graduating, moving on to the NFL. It's really critical we find top guys. I would say that's probably the most in terms of the most open position. I mentioned that on Tuesday's episode that I could not really tell you. I think Noah Pierre is going to start at the Husky position. I think Josh Sanguinetti is going to start at one of the safety positions. Outside of that, I don't have answers, and I'm not certain about Sanguinetti. I'm kind of basing that off him being the guy that stepped in last year when there were injuries. But yeah, outside of that, there were so many new faces that came in. Tyreek Daniel transfers in. Jameer Johnson, Nick Toomer transfers. JoJo Johnson, Kobe Minor, Lewis Moore, Jamison Kelly are all transfers. Not all of them this season, but all guys who have transferred in. You have a number of young players that you have no idea what you're getting. James Mons III is a redshirt freshman. Is he ready to step up and be a contributor? Jamari Sharp is a redshirt freshman. Jordan Shaw, a true freshman. You have a lot of true freshmen, and I'd be really surprised if any of them really stepped in. Amari Farrell, Jazz Boykin, and Anthony Chung, all are true freshmen. Mitchell Evans, a redshirt freshman. Like, there are a lot of names in the secondary and a lot of really young players. So who separates themselves? That's going to be one of the biggest questions, biggest things to watch, is who's going to step up and earn their spot in that secondary. It's one of the benefits here is that there are a lot of spots to be earned over the next month in that secondary. If they were to release a 2-deep depth chart right now, I think you could put almost any combination of guys in the secondary, and I wouldn't really be able to debate it. There's just so many new names in that position, and that's not something that I think is going to be solved after the final day of camp. There's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of guys earning more playing time, guys who might struggle once games start and lose playing time. I think that's going to be a very fluid position. Tom Allen was also asked about which position has changed the most. Quote, I think the D-line is the one we've changed the most by the guys we've added. We added 6 guys to that room this offseason. A lot of guys graduated. Really physically looks different, bigger. Guys have a lot more mass that we needed. Guys that have played Division I football at a high level, Power 5 guys. That's notable. There's a lot of turnover in the defensive line as well, but I think the difference is IU brought in guys that had experience at a high level at the defensive line, and I think that's why it's not quite as open. Andre Carter, is starting. No question in my mind. Pretty sure Philip Bleedy is probably going to factor in. I would think he probably has an advantage early on. Ladarius Cox is someone that has been singled out. Those three guys, I'd imagine, are three of your front runners right now, but there's a lot of other guys. Patrick Lewis Jr., he's going to certainly factor in. A transfer from Ole Miss. Carl Biddings, a transfer from Louisville. Ladarius Cox is a transfer. Carter's a transfer. Bleedy is from Texas Tech. Marcus Burris Jr. is from Texas A&M. A lot of guys came in, but they came from places where they had a little bit of experience and they played at a high level. That was what's different about the secondary. Almost all of those transfers I mentioned in the secondary were community college, junior college types of guys. Jameer Johnson came from Texas. Nick Toomer came from Stanford. I think those two guys probably have an early lead in that one. Kobe Minor from Texas Tech. Everybody else was from a community college. So with the defensive line, you have a lot more experience, a lot more proven talent on that front, and a lot of big guys. Andre Carter, 6'5", 270. Ladarius Cox, 6'4", 305. Philip Bleedy, 6'3", 295. You have a lot of really big guys in that defensive line room that are going to be really big handfuls. Patrick Lucas Jr., 6'3", 315. I think that defensive line is going to be really interesting to watch this season. And potentially, again, I'm really intrigued. I think they could really step up in a big way this year, but that's 2/3 of the defense that he's kind of talked about. One of them being the most open position, one of them with the one that's had the most turnover. It's a lot of questions to ask your defense. So it's going to be fascinating to watch how that plays out over the next month. On the flip side to this, Tom Allen was asked about his strongest room on the team, the strongest position group he has. We'll tell you who he said. Maybe not much of a surprise, but we'll talk about who he said and why he might have said that here in just a moment. Let's talk about LinkedIn, though. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you guys have to try out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for faster and for free. It's real simple. I would imagine almost all of us have used LinkedIn Jobs, or LinkedIn, I should say. And all you have to do is go to LinkedIn Jobs, create a job listing, add it to your profile, as well as a purple hiring frame, so everybody knows that you're hiring. They have simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Tom Allen spoke about the kind of flip side to the first part of that, the strongest room he has. And for me, I thought there were two possible answers, and he chose one of them. The running back room is what he selected as the strongest room. With just looking at the production they have, I can understand that. Jalen Lucas, All-American, albeit an All-American for not as a running back, but an All-American nonetheless. A super, super talented guy. I mean, I don't think I need to tell you guys how good he is. Josh Henderson, I thought, had an underrated season last year in the backfield. He really started to come on as the season went along. Ended up with 398 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. Was productive out of the backfield as a receiving threat as well. 24 catches for 274 yards and 4 more touchdowns. So you're looking at a guy flirting with 700 yards of offense and 8 touchdowns. That's a productive guy. And I think he's a good kind of yin to Jalen Lucas's yang. And not even that they're necessarily hugely different, but they're guys that I think complement each other well. They can play a similar play style in that you don't have to change what your offense does based on who's in the game. And ultimately, I like the two of them together. And then you have an addition in Christian Turner from Wake Forest last season, who had some production for the Deacons. And last year, 128 carries, 516 yards, 7 touchdowns, had a receiving touchdown as well. So 500 yards or 500 yards from scrimmage for him. You have those three guys, and you're going to be able to use multiple at the same time. Jalen Lucas kind of hinted that there'd be multiple running backs in the backfield at times, and Jalen Lucas is going to move all around the field. So you're going to be able to get all three of those guys on the field, get them snaps this season. And I think that is a fair assessment, that's probably the strongest room on the Hoosiers this season. You have some other guys who could factor in. There's not a ton of depth. Daniel Weems is a sophomore. Trent Howland is a redshirt sophomore. David Holloman is a redshirt sophomore. Risa Lozano is a redshirt freshman. Declan McMahon is a redshirt freshman, a preferred walk-on. And so you have 3 really good players, relative, and then maybe you're looking for some more of that depth. But if you're going more than 3 deep in the running back room, you probably have some injuries and things are getting a little dicey anyway. The only other position I thought he could mention, just in terms of sheer talent, is the wide receivers. Cam Camper, we know about. And then you have a whole lot of other guys that either have been productive or have some potential. DeQuise Carter is going to be super interesting to watch this season. I think there's a good chance he starts. EJ Williams Jr. Is another guy from Clemson that has had success in the past, early on in his time with Clemson. Donovan McCauley, we talked about. Anderson Kobe, we saw last season. And then someone like Omar Cooper Jr., who was highly touted coming in, redshirted last season. Is he going to be able to step up and be a bit more, or not even just a bit more productive, be able to contribute is probably a better way of saying that this season. So that's a number of guys I think that can be productive. There just might be some more questions there because Cam Camper is going to be your wide receiver 1. I don't know that anybody else is necessarily locked in. I would think Donovan McCauley and DeQuise Carter are your other 2 guys right now, but there's arguments for any number of players who could also factor into that as well. So I think those 2 are your most talented groups, probably your 2 strongest rooms on the team. It's good to have your skill positions be super talented. I'm not going to mention the offensive line. We'll move on from there. I'll try to at some point to go a whole podcast episode about the football team without mentioning the offensive line. One other thing of note, just some good news to tack on to the end of this. There's no long-term injuries that the Hoosiers were dealing with coming out of the spring. Quote, really don't have anybody else that is in that mode kind of from a limited perspective where they have to be on a play count early on. Doesn't mean there aren't injuries. Obviously, Dexter Williams, chief among them. The Hoosiers had 2 players that aren't on the roster anymore because of injuries, but there weren't any injuries suffered in spring camp that are going to set Indiana back, is probably the best way to put that. So the 2 guys, David Baker received a medical hardship. Cam Knight will be retiring from football. So best wishes to those 2 guys. Fall camp is here. Got underway officially on Wednesday. Football is here once again, and we are back in action when it comes to the gridiron. It's not the only football Indiana plays in Bloomington. The men's soccer team is setting up for what should be a super interesting season. We're going to talk about where they found themselves in the first preseason poll. It's really, really, really high up. We'll take a look at their incoming players, some transfer, a number of freshmen. Really intriguing group that is coming to Indiana for this season. We'll do all that here in a moment. So the Hoosier soccer team will head into, at least according to the United Soccer Coaches Top 25, as the number 2 team heading into the season. And they were barely the number 2 team. The number 1 team is Syracuse. And so a familiar foe, but there was very little that separated Indiana and Syracuse in the poll, similar to the national championship game. Syracuse got 4 first-place votes and even still only had 8 more total points than Indiana. Indiana got a single first-place vote, but finished just behind Syracuse. Kentucky is the number 3 seed. Duke, the 4 seed, Pitt, the 5 seed. Pitt, of another familiar opponent that the Hoosiers have run into at times in recent years. Kentucky is on Indiana's schedule, so the Hoosiers will play them in Lexington this season. Not a ton of Big Ten representation at the top. Maryland is the number 14 seed, and that is the only Big Ten team on the top 25. Also receiving votes were Rutgers, pretty far down, and Ohio State. That appears to be it. So could be maybe a bit of a down year for the Big Ten, which maybe Indiana takes advantage of that and looks to win the Big Ten regular season, something they weren't able to do last year. But the Hoosiers have a couple of teams on their schedule that they are going to play that are on this top 25. And the top 25s change a lot, especially in a sport like soccer where maybe there isn't quite as much coverage of the offseason. Number 6, Washington is going to be coming to Bloomington for the Adidas IU Credit Union Classic. So another team to watch out for as a ranked foe. Indiana's going to get chances against top teams. So that's never really a doubt or a surprise. We'll see how they handle that. But Indiana's going to be really talented. Part of that is a pretty strong class that they're bringing in. Let's look at some of the notable freshmen. They have their incoming class, 12 freshmen and 1 transfer. A lot of people joining Indiana's soccer program this fall, this summer. They join, obviously, into this fall. A couple names that are going to stick out. Josh Mayer, brother of, or the latest mayor to come through the program. Josh was one of the top recruits in the country, number 31 overall recruit, according to Top Drawer Soccer, and is, shockingly, a defender. It was his brother Joey that moved on to St. Louis, I believe, but moved on to the MLS after leading Indiana last season. Collins Aduro is a forward that was the Philadelphia Prep Player of the Year last season. So big shout out to him. He wasn't ranked necessarily, but if you're the Philadelphia Prep Player of the Year, you have beat out a number of people to be a top prospect, a top player. He's from Ghana. He had 39 goals last season, led his team to a 22-2 record. And then Justin Schreffler, a midfielder who was a United Soccer Coaches All-American last season in Ohio. His side had an undefeated regular season. He had 46 goals and 30 assists during his career at Westlake High School in Ohio. There's a number of other guys. Lucas Walters was the number 2 rated recruit in the South region, a top 150 recruit nationally. And then there was, if I scroll up here, the Hoosiers had one other top-rated recruit in the Midwest, Alex Barger, a forward from Naperville, Illinois, number 13 recruit in the Midwest, 2021-22 Gatorade Illinois Boys Soccer Player of the Year, finished with 42 assists and 43 goals, was a United Soccer Coaches High School All-American. So Indiana reloading with a number of talented players in this really big recruiting class. The one transfer, I'm going to try to say this name right, Hugo Bakarik, who is a defender from Fairleigh Dickinson. Notably, for those that might have forgot, Fairleigh Dickinson beat Purdue in men's basketball as a number 16 seed. People might have forgotten about that. I just wanted to remind them. I don't know that that Hugo had anything to do with that, but he was a defender last season, was the conference player of the year for his team last season. So for Fairleigh Dickinson, he was an all-conference player each year. He is a senior. He is joining IU after 3 years at Fairleigh Dickinson. So a lot of interesting pieces Indiana is adding to the fold, and Indiana has played freshmen if they're talented enough right away. So we'll see what Coach Yeagley does. I'm super excited to see what this soccer team does in the coming weeks and months, because I don't know, man, something about getting that close to the national title makes you hungry for more. Indiana is certainly hungry. They've done it a number of times. We'll see if they're able to capitalize on that finally get over the hump in the national title game. That'll do it for today's episode. Big thank you to you guys for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. We'll get the latest on football with the start of camp. Any other news that might break to wrap up this week. Follow us on Twitter if you guys have not already at LO_Hoosiers. Leave a quick rating and review over at iTunes, Spotify, if you guys can. That helps us out immensely. Most importantly, though, guys, I hope you all have a great Thursday. We're almost there to the end of the week. And as always, LEO.